Welcome to the latest episode of Diving into the Discourse. My name is Carmen Ramos Chandler, and I'm your host today, and we're going to be talking to Professor Vikas Malhotra about Jainism. He's a professor here at CSUN in Religious Studies, and I know most of you don't know what I'm talking about. So, Dr. Malhotra, let's launch you straight into it. Explain to people what Jainism is.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Jainism is a Indic religion. It was born in India. It's a very ancient religion too. It is older than its more well-known counterpart, which is Buddhism. And it shares a lot of some similarities with Buddhism and Hinduism. So it's a primary part of the three major Indic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. As I said, it's even older than Buddhism. So we know that the last Tirthankara, which is their term for an enlightened being, existed historically around the 5th to 6th century, which was around the same 5th or 6th century BCE, which is around the same time as the Buddha. And that Tirthankara's name was Mahavira, and he was an elder to the Buddha. And there's no evidence that they actually met, but they did know of each other.
What are, I guess I'm going to use the Christian word, tenets of Jainism? What are its principles, its driving force?
Yeah, some of the main principles, the first and foremost is ahimsa, which means nonviolence. And pretty much in many ways, the entire religion circles around this concept of nonviolence, and all of their practices revolve around this idea. But so other supporting kind of vows that Jains take are things like aparigraha, which means non-possessions, meaning minimizing how many material items you have. Because again, the focus should be on spiritual endeavors rather than material endeavors. So aparigraha means non-possessions and just not owning a lot of stuff, that's kind of how it's taken. Now, there are monks within Jainism too, and they take these vows as well. And so when they take them to a whole different level. So monks actually are not allowed to own anything. They own a few items such as a whisk to broom the floor before they walk so they don't accidentally step on bugs or any types of beings, because that's part of their primary vow, which is ahimsa, of nonviolence. So they take that very seriously. And so they own maybe 2 or 3 items for their entire life as a monk.
Like the clothing or...
Yeah, and in even some, there's a second, a different branch. There are 2 different branches within Jainism. I won't get into all that, but one branch is even more orthodox, and so they don't even own clothes. So they actually, the monks, the male monks at least, they walk around nude because they believe even clothing can be an attachment. In our culture, clothing is a big, people get attached and put a lot of value on clothing, and we put a lot of value on material things because that gives us meaning. But for them, they see it as an attachment, things that people get stuck to, and if they don't have, they, suffer. So their goal is to get rid of all attachments. And so even this branch, known as the Digambara branch, which means literally sky-clad, meaning they're clothed in sky, means that they walk around nude all the time.
Why is it so important not to own, not to acquire?
It's not about the actual objects of possession that are the problem, but it's our attachments to them, because we become attached to material goods then. And the Jains believe we should be attached to spiritual things rather than material things. And the problem that occurs is because of our attachments, that's directly related to our suffering. And basically, in our Western kind of culture, we derive a lot of our happiness and satisfaction from things that we own. That gives us a feeling of worth. And what the Jains are really saying are, and our happiness is often attached to these things too. And so when we have, many people here in the U.S., they put a lot of time into their cars, and their car is like a huge status symbol and all these things. But then if the car is destroyed, then their happiness also, and then they suffer, and then they have to figure out how to get another car. So that's the why to get rid of possessions is because we become attached to them. And then when we become attached to something which will inevitably be gone at some point, then we suffer. And so there's a connection made between those ideas. So if you don't desire anything or attach to anything, then you have no suffering.
So the nonviolence, the complete devotion to nonviolence and to that ownership or the acquisition of things. Are there other vows in Jain?
Yes. So there are 5 great vows. And those are called the Mahavratas. And those are for the monks. And like I said, the monks, they follow these vows to the T. Now, the regular Jain community, who are not monks, they're just regular people like you and me, they also follow these vows, but to a much lower degree. So they are allowed to have they have houses and they have all kinds of stuff,
What are the other vows?
So the other vows are, so as I said, nonviolence, ahimsa, is the first and foremost, and what all the other vows are ultimately supporting. 2 is parigraha, which is non-possession. 3 is, and there's no particular order, but satya, which means to always tell the truth, to don't lie. There is asteya, which means to not steal. Mm-hmm. And then brahmacharya, which is, for the monks, it means celibacy, complete celibacy, and the nuns. For Jain householders or normal people, it just means chastity, like, keeping sex within the marriage and faithfulness and non-deviant type of relations like that.
How, as someone who is a Jain, how do you function in a Western-dominated world where violence and acquisition and envy and all of that stuff is so prevalent?
Yeah. Well, I think they've done very well for themselves, the Jains. They have adapted to the society. And as I said, for the monks versus the lay people, it's the vows are much less. So it's possible to live in Western society and still follow these vows. But for monks, it would be much more difficult in the U.S. And that's why monks are actually even not allowed to ride on trains or planes or anything like that. They can only walk on their feet. So that's why there's not many monks here in the U.S. Now there is well, I don't want to get into that because that would be too complicated. But generally, the Jains here have adapted to life in the West, but they still follow these vows to the best of their ability. And in many ways, I think everyone could follow some of these ideas to the best of their ability because it's actually very useful for society. It's useful for taking care of the earth. All these things that a lot of us already kind of believe in. So yeah, they've just kind of adapted and do their best to society, like by actively being involved in things like the environmental movement, actively being involved in activism for vegetarianism, and even now veganism. In India, the Jains are always vegetarian, but they also they did take milk and dairy products. But here, an interesting movement started when Jains came over here, and they realized that the dairy industry is actually pretty destructive to the earth and also not very good to the animals. So then they started a campaign for veganism here in the U.S. Because they thought that's one way that they can apply their vows here in the U.S. So, yeah, things have changed in the sense that, there's been a bunch of scholarship on this, but they're less kind of concerned about the ascetic ideals, like how this religion started, like, they don't believe you have to become a monk necessarily now. That's the ideal that everyone wants to strive for, obviously. But in terms of an actively involved Jain, they're out doing these kind of like activist type of things, and that's how they're doing their religion nowadays here in the West.
So they're truly practicing, so to speak, what they're preaching, because so often religious leaders or those who claim to be very religious will live. We find a lot of instances of hypocrisy, yes. but the proselytizing for the Jains is deed versus words, I take it.
That's right. They don't actively proselytize. They don't try to convert people. They just kind of do their thing. And, it's amazing because there are Americans that have now converted to Jainism. There's even some examples of Americans from all different backgrounds, but becoming monks here in the U.S.
Wow.
So, yeah, and they don't believe... this is not about, you have to join our religion because then you'll be saved. This is about, how do I liberate myself? That's what the whole religion is about. It's about actions and what you need to do in order to become liberated or enlightened. So it's not something like, because Jains believe only you ultimately can be the one to do that. You can't rely on some kind of God or deity to come and save you. You have to save yourself.
What is the Enlightenment?
Enlightenment's basically, it's very similar in some ways to Buddhism and even certain groups within Hinduism. The main idea is that you are trying to break free of your karma. Mm-hmm. And karma means action. And basically, the idea of you do something bad will happen to you. But basically, they believe that we're these souls that are trapped within our bodies, which is kind of like a prison in some ways, and which is attached to materiality and all these kind of, ideas. And the goal is to basically, through Jain practice, which is the main goal, is to lessen one's karmas or bad actions so that you become less stuck in the material world and be more attached to, or more, integrated into the spiritual world. And that happens through following the vows, mm-hmm. through gaining wisdom, and through various religious duties and practices. And through that, one can be enlightened, which means that they will become free of their karma, and then ultimately they won't be reincarnated again. And that's the final liberation, is because they believe we're stuck in what they call samsara, which is the cycle of birth and mm-hmm. death and rebirth. And we're stuck on this wheel like a hamster wheel, and we're just constantly living, having a full life, and then we die, but then we come back again. We're reborn, and we have to start all over again. So their final idea of what emancipation or liberation is to get off of this wheel and to achieve the highest kind of state of consciousness, which is even beyond one's body, which is the pure soul that each living being in the world has. And this is why they practice nonviolence, because they believe all beings in the world have this soul, which they call a jiva, which is sacred in nature. And that means even little bugs and little microorganisms, even things like water and fire, earth, believed to be living things. And so they believe that if you hurt or injure these living things, that's what causes bad karma. And that's what keeps you stuck here in this cycle. So their ultimate goal is to really stop hurting all living beings, doing these actions. And the goal is to ultimately leave this hamster wheel of existence that we're on.
So the idea that the kinder, more respectful of the beings we cohabitate with, and the beings are not limited to just human beings, as we learn and are reborn until we do it right, so to speak.
Yeah, ultimately, Jains believe that everyone will achieve liberation at some point.
Wow.
We will all go through these cycles until we get it right. Until we meet the right teacher, until we get the right teachings, or until we start doing the right practices. But we're all on this, evolutionary journey. And they believe when you are reborn, you can come back in a few different ways. You can come back as an animal. You can come back as a god. You can come back as a human. Or you can come back and be in the realm of hell for a short time. But none of these places are permanent. They're all temporary. And all of us are just cycling through them all the time over our journey of existence, of the soul's existence. Right?
And it's the soul that's learning.
Yeah, it's the soul that's ultimately evolving through the whole process, over millions or over hundreds of thousands of lifetimes. We all have been these different lives. This is another reason for the nonviolence, because the Jains will say, this cow could have been your grandmother. Mm-hmm. And do you really want to kill your grandmother, right? So that idea is there that someone can be reincarnated into an animal, and then we're eating that animal. And, obviously that's not good karma. So
it almost sounds like a joke, but if you listen to the religion, you get the idea of respect.
Yes, very much.
Is there a community? They're not proselytizing, but is there a community where someone can go to learn more about Jainism, or do they just have to take your class?
Oh, no. Well, yeah. I mean, taking my class is a great start, but there are Jain communities all over the U.S. now. We have we're very lucky to have a very large and active community here in Southern California. There is a Jain center in Buena Park and they have an amazing temple, and there's teachers there, and they do all kinds of programs with the community, and they have a school, I believe, also. And they're doing amazing kind of work. So anyone is welcome. They have services and stuff going on all the time there. So that's where I would direct people. And I've also been told that sometime, maybe this year or the following, there's going to be another Jain center in Tahunga, which is closer to us here. So once that is established, which may be happening soon, I'll be taking my classes there as well.
I have a really dumb question, but Jains are peaceful because they don't want to do harm.
That's right.
The religion is so old. How has it been able to survive these centuries, given I am 100% sure the animus, the violence they've encountered, because they are nonviolent, and those who embrace violence tend to want to take advantage and abuse those they know are not going to hit back.
Yeah. Yeah, the Jains have they're survivalists for sure. I mean, this is we know for sure that this religion existed in the 5th and 6th century BCE, but the previous enlightened person, they have now found historical evidence which goes back to the 8th or 9th century BCE. And so it's possibly that it may be even older than that. So we don't know. But the fact that they have been able to survive while many other Indian religions or philosophical schools did not is a testament to, I believe, the importance of the principles that they're practicing. And they, in many ways, Buddhism and Hinduism got a lot of their ideas about nonviolence and from the Jains. And so those principles have been incorporated into these other religions. And they have just maintained, I believe, over the centuries because they don't get in the way. They stay out of politics. They stay out of, nowadays they're much more active, but I think previously they were, more concerned about their practices. And again, the ideal is to become a monk or a nun where you leave the world. You're not involved in the normal, ordinary world anymore because your focus is on the spiritual world. And I think those and they don't proselytize, so they're not getting in conflict with, oh, you got to be like us, and we want to change you. So I think those kind of factors have allowed it to maintain over the many centuries.
Now, you're the endowed professor of Jain Studies at CSUN. How did that professorship come about? And what are your goals as the endowed professor of Jain Studies?
Sure. Yeah. So I have, my area is South Asian, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Those are always been my specialties. So I was teaching all kinds of other classes here, including anything related to the Indic religions. And apparently they had made a posting for this position, but I had not finished my dissertation yet the first time around. And so I could not get an application in on time because my dissertation was going to take at least a couple more years. So I thought it was gone, and so they had actually hired someone, but that person ended up not working out for whatever reason. And so they redid the call. And at that point, I had now I was just finishing my dissertation. So I was like, I'd love to apply. This is part of my field, and I've already been here. And they all, knew me and knew my work. So they were like, yeah, sure, you can apply. And then I just got it.
So give me the proper name, because I know the proper name of the endowed professorship. I would butcher the title.
Oh, what do you have there?
I have the Bhagwan Ajitnath.
Oh, yeah, Ajitnath. Yeah,
Okay.
That's a name of one of the Tirthankaras. In Jainism, there are, which are the enlightened beings. In Jainism, there are 24 enlightened beings. Mahavira, as I said, was the last. And Ajitnath is just considered one of those enlightened beings.
I thought I was well-read and well-educated, but it wasn't until the endowed professorship was created that I realized that Jains exist, that Jainism exists, that this is a centuries-old religion, and I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, so, one of the duties of Jain householders, they're supposed to do charity work. And this charity work includes things like helping, for example, they'll help free animals from slaughterhouses, or they'll give charity to people in need, poor people and houseless people and whatnot. And then one of the other duties is to promote the teachings of Jainism. And financially, the Jains have done very well. overall. Like they're in India, they may be even though they're a very small community in India, they are, I believe, the highest economic group. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But so it has become here in the U.S., one of their driving goals is to help promote some of these ideas because ultimately they believe it's good for our society to if you have a society that's revolved around nonviolence, imagine how society would change.
Nonviolence and charity? Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah, if those are your core values, right? So I think that they have really been putting efforts now into using their finances because, again, as a part of this vow of non-possessions, they are supposed to, the money that they make, they're supposed to spend on their duties, and one of those duties is to help promote the religion. So they've been actively involved in creating these chairs all throughout the U.S. And I believe in California, there's like 20 some chairs now. So they're really, really active. And again, the whole idea is being really just to have more scholarship on Jainism because Buddhism and Hinduism, there's a lot of scholarship and everyone knows what those basically, they've heard about it.
Yeah.
But very little is known about Jainism. So I believe that's what they're trying to do is to spread the word, spread some of the ideas of the teachings, and just get some scholarship on it.
What do the students, I assume not many of the students are very familiar with Jainism when they're in your class. What is the reaction? They take the class because it fulfills the religious studies requirement pretty much. But what happens when they get in the class?
It's been really great. No one has really heard or very little bit before joining the class. But, once it's couched in kind of in the way that I do it in my class is that this is in many ways one of the most influential religions in India because it drastically shaped how Buddhism would become and how Hinduism would come to look. And so when they realize that, that kind of important historical influence, then they're much more open to whatever it is. And, as I said, there are some similarities with Buddhism. And so students, for whatever reason, they know more about Buddhism out here in the U.S. or maybe it's California. And so they have some idea about enlightenment and nirvana and all these ideas because that's shared with the Jainism. But what I've found is that the students have really taken to the ideas in the class and they really, we do pretty deep philosophical dive and we really look at the Jain cosmology and how they understand the universe and what the purpose is and all these kind of things. And many of the ideas and the vows and the principles are things that many of us, just as regular humans, are really attracted to or just believe kind of inherently and naturally. Like, I don't want to hurt somebody else or kill somebody or, why do I need all this stuff? And, so it's attractive to a lot of students because we're in a hyper materialistic society. And this is a whole different way of looking at the world, why we're here and what we're doing and what's important. And many of the principles just seem to resonate with a lot of the students. So I've had a really great experience with the students. They've really taken to it. They really find it super interesting. And in every case, students are always like, I think I can apply some of these ideas to my own life. Like I can see the benefit, to my life or, and they're always wanting to know more. So
what are some of the ideas or the benefits they hope to apply or adopt? I mean, it's not overnight, all of a sudden the light comes on, but what are some of the practices they hope to incorporate?
Yeah, I mean, from some of my students, I've already heard them talking about wanting to eat less meat, because of the health benefits, but also because of the damage the meat industry does to the environment. And they just see the benefit of not of being a little bit more careful with their life and not just kind of this rampant killing that our society is kind of involved in. I mean, to be straight up, right? As some other student I remember was like, they were going to, they would often bat flies and mosquitoes, and they were saying, I'm going to think about that again. Like I want to apply. Like, why do I need to kill? Like, do I really need? And the other main one I think is this non-possession, because I think people are realizing that material goods aren't really going to make you happy in the end, because everything changes, everything it gets destroyed at some point, and so not getting attached to material objects. I heard some students also say that they're going to kind of just make that a practice. Like, do I really need this? Is this really necessary? What's the impact of what I'm buying, on the world? And so just being able to reflect and think about that. That's kind of what I've seen the students kind of take up so far.
What are the discussions like in your classroom? I mean, let's be frank here. We're in Los Angeles, one of the most materialistic capitals of the world.
Absolutely.
What are the dialogues like?
Well, like I said, it's just they are coming with no knowledge of this. So it's a very kind of intro level in the sense that I go deep into what is the perspective of the Jains from the ground up. So you have to understand what their cosmology is.
What is that?
Well, this idea about samsara and why we're here and we're trapped because of our attachments to things like material goods, and because of our actions. Our bad karma is what keeps us trapped in here. But there's a higher place that we can, get to, which is this idea of liberation. So, all kinds of things get talked about, because the Jains, like I said, they don't believe in a creator God, that there's some person out there who's controlling everything. They believe that you have to save yourself. You're the one that has to do the work. No amount of, prayers to some, being is going to save you. You actually have to do the good work, and then you can get saved. So, because most of the students are coming from usually Christian or, Judeo or Jewish or Islamic background, this is a very different idea. It's completely unheard of.
There's no divine intervention.
Exactly.
You are the person who's going to get you to the next level.
And that's based on your actions, what you do. So there's a lot of conversations about the idea of God and what that means in Jainism. It's just because the foundational aspect of it's so different from what most kids are used to. There's just so much to talk about just in that area.
It's just you're turning it all on their head. I mean, as someone who went to Catholicism, again, divine intervention, and the idea that the divine is not intervening, however you define that, but that you truly, your actions, your thoughts, your interactions are what will be driving your ascension. Is totally, it doesn't matter how many times you go on your knees and you pray, your actions speak louder than your words.
That's right. That's right. And, recognizing, one of the big things in Jainism is interdependence, how everything is connected, how the world is connected to you, how you're connected to the world, how you're connected to other beings in the world, and how your actions have a rippling effect, that can change, so much and do so much harm if you're not doing good actions. So this is a whole different perspective for students to see.
Oh, yeah, I'm just thinking, I can just see it now. I just went, wow, and I think that interaction, it's not just you.
Exactly.
It's not the selfish you. it's the generous you in the sense of how I react to that being
Yep.
and how my actions positively
Yes.
impact that being.
Exactly. And that's why they take so much care not to harm, because you harming just one being is not just one being. It's probably harming a whole chain of other events that will cause harm. And ultimately, the Jains say you think you're hurting others, but ultimately you're hurting yourself, because everything in the universe is connected together, right? So if you are causing harm to the earth is what gives us life. If you harm the earth, you're going to be ultimately hurting yourself, right? So it's this long, bigger view that the Jains are talking about.
That totally explains their interest in environmentalism. I mean, it's Earth is what gives us life. If we're killing the Earth, we're killing ourselves.
That's right, exactly, and that is a big kind of Jain tenet.
Wow.
Which is similar in many ways to a lot of indigenous cultures, in Native American traditions and stuff. That's how they also view it. So there are some interesting similarities there.
Wow. What is the reaction to the students? Do they look forward to the visit to the Jain temple? And
Yeah. When the class, this last class I had was online, so I tried to get everyone to come, but it's harder to get an online class to go visit somewhere, because technically you're not you can't force the students to do that. But in my other in-person classes, we took them there, and they were just blown away. And if you haven't been, I highly suggest, because the Jain temple architecture is some of the best you will ever see. Even compared to, you may have seen maybe Hindu or Buddhist temples, but Jain temple architecture is just like on a whole nother level in terms of the detail and the work. So it's a really beautiful just place to visit. They also have a really interesting a wooden carved temple that's originally from it was I don't know if it was made in India, but it was commissioned in London. Anyway, it was part of the St. Louis World Fair in 1904.
wow.
And it went through its own really interesting history, but now it's established at this Jain Center in Buena Park. So it's a beautiful, just gorgeous temple, the wooden carvings and stuff. It's my students have always loved the visits there, not just for the beauty of the temple, which is awesome, of course, but they get to meet real Jains, because when you don't meet Jains, then you're like, oh, they're this
Mythic figures.
Yeah, legendary figures. How did they? But when you meet them, they're just normal people. But then you can find out how Jains are living, and how they're practicing their vows within America. And so that's always a really eye-opening thing for students. Because, again, these ideas are not impossible to do. They can see, there's a whole bunch of people doing these ideas very easily and living happily in this society. So it makes them aware that they too can, if they choose to, try some of those things.
What would a typical Jain's life be like? I think it's almost surreal when you talk about how what the principles are, but how would day-to-day life be?
It wouldn't be any different, I think, than most normal people's, just regular people in the U.S. They have their temples that someone like a church, they'll go to on weekends, or depending how devoted they are, they might go every day. Who knows? They're just, the only difference, like I said, is their carefulness in, maintaining a vegetarian or vegan diet, being actively involved in charities and spreading the knowledge or helping to build temples, those kinds of duties. I don't believe there's, and this comes out when you meet Jain people. They're just like us, they're just careful. They're more careful, and they're taking certain precautions. Now, Jain monks and nuns, it's a very different story, because they are living as a monk or a nun, and they have left the world. So Jain householders are still in the world, and they're just being more careful. But the Jain ascetics, that's, I think, a little bit more difficult for people to wrap their heads around what their daily life is, because it's very controlled and regulated, and they're doing spiritual practice every moment of their life,
They would have to be super careful with the nonviolence tenet alone, because if they recognize the validity of each being to live, just walking through life, you have to be...
Violence occurs.
Yeah.
Right? Yes. So that's why Jain monks, it's recognized in Jainism that violence is a part of life. There's no getting around it completely. So it's an ideal that they're trying to get to. But Jain monks and nuns, they try to get to it as far as possible. So so they're unable, for example, to cook their own food, to make their own food. They're not allowed to take cars, to take trains or planes. Again, because of the damage that it can do to other living beings, all kinds of living beings, because they care about even these like microorganisms that we can't even see.
Yeah.
They care about that. So many Jain monks will wear masks around their faces so they don't accidentally inhale bugs or other what they called wind beings or air beings. They don't cook their own food, so they're one of the things Jain monks do is beg for food, which really means the Jain householder lay community, they take care of the monks and the nuns. All of their survival needs, which are very basic, are taken care by the community. This allows them to focus wholly on their spiritual practice, so that they too can become enlightened. And so there's a symbiotic relationship, because if they can do their practices, if they can do their teachings, then they gain more wisdom, they get more enlightened, and then they can teach the community. So there's but because they can't do things like cook their own food, or some of them don't even wear clothes, and they travel on their feet, and all kinds of restrictions that they have. The Jain community takes care of that, and takes care of their basic needs, so that they're not getting bad karma, basically, is what it comes down to. So that they maintain, minimize their bad karma, minimize their bad actions in the world, continue to do their studying, continue to do their meditations, and then this makes them realized beings eventually.
I can see how taking your class or learning about Jainism, well, it may not convert me to the religion. It should, every time we talk, I think more. Yeah. I think that's the point. It's not, this is not, obviously we're a religious studies department, which is not about proselytizing. It's just about the academic study of religion. But there are certain ideas, I think, in these traditions which resonate naturally with people, and make sense. When you really think about things, these things make sense. And so I think students become attracted to those ideas because they make sense. It fits in with their particular worldview. It's just so affirming in a sense that there are people, the Jains, who for centuries have understood and respected the relationship beings, including human beings, have with the environment around them. It's taken us centuries to recognize the impact of our relationships. And now we're dealing with the fallout with climate change and things like that. But yet there were people who innately understood that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite amazing, I think. And like I said, I personally believe that if some of these principles were foundational values of our society, we would be in a much better shape than we are now. I mean, look at the state of America right now.
Well, the nonviolence, the acquisition, the idea of charity.
Yeah.
Those are simple principles that, in theory, all religions.
Yeah. And there's another principle that I should mention. It's called anekantavada, which means the realizing the multiplicity of reality or the plurality of views. And this has to do a bit with their cosmology, but what it has become is the idea that recognizing the relativity of truth, mm-hmm. and therefore that all people's viewpoints have some value. And so by making that a core value, that promotes tolerance. So you're not going to just immediately, someone gives you their view, you're not going to immediately say like, false, you're wrong, like, which is what we see nowadays and why there's so much division in the U.S., but actually trying to see the truth of what they're saying, because there may be some aspect of truth there, and giving them that respect, and having discussion, What we see nowadays is just complete divisiveness, and so I think there's a lot to say about having that as a value to recognize these different the multiplicity of perspectives and to respect that.
Can you imagine the conversation in this climate if the people around the table adopted that approach?
Yeah.
You'd recognize the commonality of truth.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And that is the point. The story of this principle is a very ancient story, actually. Mm-hmm. And it was basically, there's 6 blind men, and they heard that an elephant has come into the town. Mm-hmm. And none of them have ever seen an elephant. So they all go to their respective side of the elephant, and they proclaim their truth. They proclaim what their perspective is. So one guy goes to the trunk of the elephant, and he's like, oh my God, an elephant is just a snake. It's just a big snake. The other guy goes to the leg of the elephant, and he's like, no, it's not a snake. It's more like a tree stump. It feels like a tree stump. And then another guy goes to the tail of the elephant. He's like, no, it's more like a broom. It's like a whisk. So they all go to their particular sides without ever seeing the big picture, obviously, because they're blind. And so they all have their views, which are not completely wrong, because they're only getting one piece of the entire picture. So they're not completely wrong, but because they're blind, they don't have the full picture. And so it's just recognizing that people are coming from a particular perspective. They may not have the whole picture, but they are speaking their truth. And so to recognize and kind of respect that. And then finally, when all of them speak together, they sit together and they all describe, then they finally get a picture of what a real elephant is, and that's what I believe is needed these days, is for us to be really sitting around the table together, understanding what each person's perspective is, how it is that they came up and constructed that perspective. That's how we get to real truth, I think.
I don't know if Jainism everybody needs to adopt and practice the religion, but I wish its teachers, there were more teachers so we could have these types of conversations where we recognize the other's truth and not readily dismiss it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, that's what the goal of these chairs are. is that we can start creating these conversations within the university. Like I said, we have Buddhist studies and Hindu studies in all the major universities, but there hasn't really been Jain studies. So I think this is a really valuable thing that we can add, and will just really enhance the conversation, I think.
What gets me is Jain is older.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Why do you think it's been overlooked? I won't say neglected, I'm going to say overlooked.
Primarily because it is a small group, and like I said, they're not proselytizing. It's a very, very small community. I think, what's the number? It's like within India, it's like, 0.04% of the entire population, And so I think they've just kind of gone under the radar, and that's where they've stayed, and that's where they're, happy because, they can maintain what they're doing. But I just don't think there has been, I think for actually, for some time when scholarship started about Jainism too, they only were focusing on the ascetics, the monks and the nuns, and they saw it as this very kind of extreme religion. And they really were just comparing it to Buddhism in many ways. But I don't think they really understood the depth of it. And now that, we now have some English translations of their ancient scriptures and stuff, like now people are starting to recognize the place that Jainism had within the history of these religions. So it's changing. That's the good thing, is that there's going to be more awareness now. But I think it's primarily just because it's been a very small community.
I would love to just have some Jains come and start a dialogue, but it seems to me with their nonviolent, their embrace, not just embrace, but embodiment of nonviolence, the discouragement of excess wealth and possessiveness, combined with the respect for an other's truth and not dismissing it, they could create an environment. You could build bridges in a totally heated world as we're in now.
Absolutely. And I think that is going to be one of my goals as the chair here for this position, is to create annual conferences where we can put the Jains in dialogue with other groups, whether it's politics, business practices, I think would be a really good one here because our business school is very big. And a lot of business students, we had some business students in my class, and they were blown away, and they were like, how do we adopt this into our business ethic? And there is, there's a place for that. So I think having those kinds of discussions about nonviolence and environmentalism, these are things that are very relevant. Sorry, I keep hitting this thing. Is very relevant to today's society. And I think students are really, really interested in knowing other perspectives and knowing other worldviews, because what they're seeing today is quite a mess. And so in many ways, I think these conversations are necessary for us to make changes in society today.
I think it's beyond students. I would love to have community dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Jains here are super open, very friendly, and would love more of that stuff. So I welcome any ideas if you want to ever arrange something.
God, I just trying to think, how could we facilitate, and this is my fantasy, how do we facilitate a dialogue where we invite people together? And it would seem to me the ones to do the actual facilitation, encouraging the exchange of words would be the Jains.
Yeah.
Not the partisans, but the Jains.
Yeah. I think we should make it happen.
I'm thinking about we should make it happen.
Yeah.
Dr. Malhotra, thank you so much. Is there anything else we should have covered that I've forgotten?
No, it was my great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I don't think I really have anything to add. Yeah. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Malhotra, and thank you all for joining us for this episode of Diving into the Discourse. Stay tuned, and don't forget that we are available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, as well as on the Cease and Conversations website. Thank you.